Welcome to the 11th session of the seminar series on autonomous mobility and the future of transportation. My name is Richard Mix, and today I will be the moderator of this session. To start, let me briefly mention some instructions for this session. So first, please keep the microphones and cameras turned off. There is a round of questions and answers at the end of the session, so please send us your questions through the Q&A tab. And include your name and institution in your question so we can mention it when we're reading your question. So let me give you the program of today's session. First, we'll start with some welcoming remarks from Yolanda Martinez, country representative from the IDB in Chile. Then we'll continue with the keynote talk from Rahul Mangaram of University of Pennsylvania. Then we'll have the comments from Marisela Ponce de Leon of IDB Transport. And to finish, we'll have a round of questions and answers from the public. So first, let's welcome Yolanda Martinez, country representative of the Inter-American Development Bank in Chile. Yolanda, welcome to the session.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very happy to be giving you this welcome remarks for the Inter-American Development Bank. Having the opportunity to design and to support innovation ecosystems in the countries that we work is extremely important. And we are very thankful with the Ministry of Transport and Telecommunications in Chile for the opportunity to collaborate with the private sector, the academic community, the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Chile to install the first electronic autonomous vehicle hub in the region. This is an effort that really motivates us and that reflects our commitment to making an innovation agenda the main driver of development effectiveness in Latin America and Chile. And I really invite you to get involved in this initiative. We have the opportunity to have the first phase of this project during the months of January and March with very good results, having the opportunity to install the vehicle in one of the parks in Santiago and being able to test what is the user experience in this type of technology, what is the reaction of regular people and the interaction with this type of technology. The objective was to gather data about their experience that can provide relevant insights for the policy making process, and to detonate with that a new ecosystem of entrepreneurs that really are eager to design a new generation of digital services around autonomous vehicles. So we are very excited for this project. I would like to recognize and to show our gratitude with all the partners that are making this, not only seminar, but the entire project possible, to encourage you to get involved, to participate. There are many activities. One of them is this seminar series to create awareness, to have the participation of many different speakers from academia, from private sector, from different areas of expertise in the bank, to create a very strong community within Chile and Latin America and the Caribbean to really embrace this emerging technology that is going to become massive in a very short period of time. And our commitment with the countries that we work, and starting with Chile, is to prepare every change that will require the regulatory environment to really take the most benefit of this emerging technology. So thank you for being part of this seminar. Thank you to today's speakers to share this passion for innovation and tech for impact in Latin America and the community. Please keep posted and participate, ask questions, follow everything that is related to the project, to the different activities that we have around. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda, for your words. So let's continue with our keynote speaker. He's Rahul Mangaram, and I'll give you a short description of his profile. So Rahul is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering and in the Department of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the Penn Director of the DOT Mobility 21 National University Transportation Center, which focuses on technologies for safe and efficient movement of people and goods. His interests are in cyber-physical systems at the intersection of formal methods, machine learning, and controls, and he has been recognized with multiple awards for his work in these areas. He received his PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. Rahul, welcome to the session.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Yolanda. It's my pleasure to be here, and I will hopefully give you an interesting talk on some of the research questions that we ask regarding how do we build the safe and efficient autonomous systems. But before we start about all about autonomous vehicles, they are already here, right? And so this year, because Tesla has been extremely profitable, they're going to give away 5 Teslas, and if your birthday hasn't passed yet, you could have a chance, right? So how many of y'all, I would like to ask this to the virtual audience, how many of y'all would like a Tesla, for your birthday for free, right? I mean, that's a good deal, right? And you have to drive it in autopilot mode, and that's obviously my trick question. So let's look at what the Tesla how the Tesla has been over the years. This is from 2016. There's a car in front, and then you see the Tesla just taps this parked van on the side. So nothing really bad happened, but it shouldn't have done that, right? So this is in China now, a little bit later. And so what happens here is that Tesla scrapes the other car. So even though the other car is very visible, it's very similar to the previous case. The mirrors break, the car gets scratched on the side. So again, nothing really bad happens. And then now we look at things as the speed increases, right? So this is again in China, and there's a street sweeper there.
这段视频来自事故车辆的行车记录仪。从视频当中可以看到，当天天气晴好，车辆速度也并不快。驾驶人在发生事故的1分钟前还哼了几句歌，而随后便毫无防备地撞上了前面的道路清扫车。
So in this case, what happened was there was a Tesla driving in autopilot at about 55 miles per hour, and there was a street sweeper on the road, and it was quite visible from a distance. But then the car basically had an accident with the street sweeper when it collided with that, and there was a 24-year-old who died on the spot, right? And now you ask the question, okay, well, what happened? What went wrong? But the question is, autonomous vehicles are coming, but they're coming in many different ways, right? And if you look at the general transportation, and the logistics sort of world, whether it is on autonomy in aircrafts, we already have autopilot systems, autonomous ships are, and autonomous ports are already underway. Entire supply chain, with having trucking that is autonomous, warehouse robots that are autonomous, and what we call service bots or last mile robots. That's also big focus over here, right? And so it's not just about road transportation. It is actually autonomy and automation is now at a very accelerated pace, across the board. And we see that, from within agriculture. For example, just last week, the University of Pennsylvania won a $26 million award to work on the future of, autonomy and agriculture. So how can we have, more efficient agriculture, more dense agriculture, more responsive agriculture to changes in climate, pesticides, water stresses, and same things are happening in factory automation. Warehouses are getting automated. Even retail stores are getting automated, where you have robots that are going and doing automatic stock checking. And so so actually this entire, logistics world has just exploded in the last 10 years. More than 70% of the company logos that are over here are new companies, right? And they are companies that are working in different parts of the logistics sort of spectrum. And whether it is from, just warehouse management to delivery and freight and trucking, to, building sensors and so on, right? And so like a big trend, for example, now in COVID times in the US is how do we do last mile delivery? And so companies like Neuro over here, they're building these delivery trucks. And so you can think of Neuro as an example of a startup company. It has maybe about 300 to 500 employees. That number keeps changing over time. But this is a company that has funded more than $950 million, right? I mean, imagine just a startup company. But that shows you that this is sort of where the focus is moving to. And so today's talk is, and then similarly, we look at, autonomy for trucking, because for trucking, every mile of driving a truck, 22 cents goes for the fuel, for the driver, for the lease and maintenance of the truck. And then so that's 22 cents per mile goes for that. And 11 cents per mile goes for the insurance and for the liability aspects of the truck. And so for the trucking, autonomy makes a lot of sense because it can affect the bottom line. Now, how autonomy comes in trucking, it does not mean that platooning is the only way. There are many ways of having autonomy with trucking. And but that's a market that is much more well-focused than the commercial, vehicle. Like, I mean, the civilian, a car and sedan market over there. So today, what I'm going to talk to you about is just get some sense about, okay, we have, different levels and different types of autonomy that are coming in. But if you were to sit in an autonomous car or an autonomous bus, how do you understand, how safe is it? And how do you understand this aspect of safety with autonomous systems? And so we're going to focus on, trying to define safety, understand that safety. And so as Richard had mentioned during the introduction, a lot of my research, focuses on looking at these safety critical or life critical questions. And where we ask, how do we basically provide guarantees for safety and performance? And we work on these areas called formal methods that build models, mathematical models of these systems of how the car drives. And I'll give you some examples of that. So we can analyze the systems, without just looking at the particular code of the system. We want to look at how the system is controlling itself and making decisions, for different driving scenarios. And that's why we look at control systems. And a lot of these are very complex models. So it makes sense to use machine learning to capture these complex models, but we want to also know what are the limitations of machine learning? How far can we keep pushing the threshold of what machine learning can achieve in terms of safety and performance? And so in general, my research focuses on different aspects of life critical systems, from medical devices, autonomous systems, energy systems. Today, we will focus just on the autonomous systems part and how we can answer this question of, I get into an autonomous vehicle, or I'm crossing the street and there's an autonomous vehicle coming down the street. How do we actually provide these guarantees of safety and performance and ensure that, the systems we are building can come to market in time, but at the same time, they do not bring in, a large amount of hazards as they do that. And so these are sort of the questions that we look at as part of this department, US Department of Transportation, Mobility 21. It's a national transportation center between Carnegie Mellon University, Ohio State, and University of Pennsylvania. I serve as the Penn director. And so this is like a $14 million center till 2022. And this is a third such center that we have run. And essentially we are focusing on this question of how do we build, and our focus is on not just doing the research and development, but also the deployment, right? So it's really important that we actually engage with the transportation community, the administration, to actually roll out these systems, to provide a framework for how these systems can work with industry and with, the government. So one particular question, that we started to ask back in about 2015, 2016 was, if, you know, when I started to drive, I went to the, driver's license center. They gave me, I did a test I waited for 2 hours, and then I did a test for 15 minutes. And they said, here's a driver's license. You can drive for the rest of your life, and just renew it every 4 years. And but how do we do the same for an autonomous vehicle, right? The driver is no longer in charge, and now the machine is making a lot of these decisions. And the machine is not entirely in your control. The machine is making these decisions independent of you. The machine may be a better driver or a worse driver. And so we look at how does this machine start to make these decisions, right? So on the left side, you can see, you know, this is the eyes and the ears and the senses of the machine. So it's going through this, it's perceiving the world over here from, you know, a camera view to a depth view to, you know, really looking at how fast objects are moving in an optical flow view. It can then do in real-time object detection. And then also in real time, it can do what is called, image segmentation over here, semantic segmentation, where it says, well, this is the surface you can drive on. These are other vehicles. This is a person. This is a sidewalk. You can't drive on a sidewalk. So it's giving some sense of, you know, what the world is like. And so it provides all of that into the sensors and perception input. And then it has to start to plan. And the planner is really deciding, you know, where the vehicle should go next. And so the planner at the mission level says, okay, I want to drive from, you know, Philadelphia to New York. And that's the mission planner. It's like Google Maps that you would use. How do I go from point A to point B? That's at long time scales. And then we look at the behavioral planner. It says, okay, well, you want to get onto the highway. You need to take this on-ramp. You need to take this left turn. You need to overtake this vehicle. It's making these discrete decisions. It's choosing what to do at this point of time, what to do next. And then the local planner says, okay, in order for you to get onto this on-ramp, you can follow, you know, these trajectories. This is the best one. Now follow this line. So it's kind of like a line following robot at that point, but it's going through this sense, plan, and then act, which is basically pushing the throttle for speed and acceleration, and the steering wheel over there, right? So it's trying, and those are the two inputs, and it is doing this sense, plan, act loop more than 100 times a second. And that's how the vehicle is able to move forward and make these decisions and try to navigate the world over there, right? So, but as it's navigating the world, you can see over here, there are some rules, like, you know, that there are traffic rules, and there are traffic rules in the US, there are traffic rules in Chile, and they are slightly different, slightly similar, but we have to adhere to these rules. And, you know, like you and me don't have to be very strict about the rules. Like if the speed limit is 65 miles per hour, then we can go at 70, 75 sometimes to overtake, right? I mean, but for a programmed vehicle, we have to somehow encode these rules and say, okay, well, the speed limit, you have to stay within the speed limit. You got to keep some spacing with the other vehicles. If you want to change a lane to take a left turn, then you need to change to the left lane. And so essentially what this vehicle is trying to think of is it has kind of two brains. It's trying to think of the continuous dynamics of how the vehicle should move, you know, in the short horizon, and what kind of trajectory should it follow. And then in the medium horizon, it's trying to decide, should I overtake? Should I change the lane? Should I get onto this on-ramp? Should I slow down? And it's trying to make these discrete decisions. Like you and me, when we drive, we don't even actively think about that anymore. It's just part of our unconscious behavior because we have been driving for so long in that sense, right? And that's the difference between like a driver that is, you know, alert but experienced, and a driver that is a new driver, right? So, but now let's try to understand how we can capture these requirements in, you know, in mathematics, like that, right? So here this vehicle tried to get onto the on-ramp, and it was a pretty risky merge, but we have some requirements. If the car slips, then, you know, recover in 3 seconds, stay within the lane markers, maintain a minimum distance with other vehicles. And so the model that we make of this car before we put the car on the road is that you need to satisfy all of these requirements as an autonomous driver before you go on the road. But now when the vehicle actually drives, the world is very different. Reality is very different from any model we can make whether we are doing it in simulation or mathematically. For example, the other vehicles over here could be more aggressive. This could be a Boston driver, which is very aggressive driver in general, than compared to, say, like a Seattle driver, who is a little bit more polite on average. This could be like the car, for example. So that means these other agents over here, the other vehicles could be more aggressive than we expected them to be. The car, for example, could have slower actuation times than we modeled it to be. There could be black ice or oil slicks on the road, and the car could skid. So if the car was supposed to follow this red trajectory and say that is what the mathematical model said it should do, but it skids, and slips, and then it recovers within 3 seconds as it's supposed to, but then it gets onto the highway with a different angle and a different velocity. Now, does that make it unsafe because it deviated from what the strict model was supposed to do? So this is the problem that, when we try to design systems and say this is how it should behave, the real world does not allow it to behave because the environment has disturbances. The environment is, constantly changing. So we can't think of the design that we have as just safe and unsafe. Oh, this car is safe. No, this medical device I'm going to put in my body is unsafe or safe. We have to really look at, like in this case, this car is trying to get onto an exit, and it's very close to the other car. So that's a little bit unsafe. If it gets even closer, it's even more unsafe. And so we want to look at safety as a spectrum from, very unsafe to very safe. And we want to be able to quantify that and have a continuous measure of safety. Because when we design the model, we can say, oh, this model now can work with a lot of disturbances from the real world. So that goes back to saying, okay, well, initially our question was, does this autonomous vehicle satisfy these design requirements? But we know that the world is going to prevent it from perfectly satisfying these requirements. And our models cannot model the entire complexity and changes of weather and everything on the world. So we have a more refined question to say, well, how robustly or how well can you quantify how well this design of this vehicle will satisfy these requirements? So we look at it as a spectrum going from increasingly unsafe to increasingly safe. But what this is captured as is as a robustness metric. And robustness is basically a quantification of whether this model that you have, it is proved to be safe. But if we change the scenario even slightly and say the road becomes more slippery, then the model cannot provide any guarantees. So then we say that that model has low robustness, versus if the model can tolerate large disturbances and still be safe, then like wheel slippage, delayed actuation, aggressive drivers, and still be safe, then we say, oh, this model is very robust and we have a lot of confidence in this model. And no matter how much, whether the world changes within this larger range, we can still guarantee safety. And that's what we want. We want robust models. But we want to know when is our model or when is our vehicle that we are designing less robust and when is it more robust. And that's sort of the search. And so back in 2015, we obviously start with computer games, and this is Grand Theft Auto. And because we said we can change the weather, we can change the lighting, we can make hail, race, and we can even catch the vehicle. So let's look at how these practices actually work. And this was really to capture actually a situation that happened back in 2016, where a Tesla car was driving on a road in Florida, and the driver, was just sitting and actually watching Harry Potter on his iPad. And then the car saw a truck and basically the trailer of the truck. And the car basically said, I don't know what this is. And it just went through the truck and it went under the trailer. And so in this video, for example, the car doesn't go under the trailer because we can't do that in the game. But then the top of the car got cut off. The driver died on the spot in the Tesla autopilot car. And then the car drove off the road, broke through a fence, and drove through a field, and then crashed into a power pole and fell into a ditch. And the car was still trying to drive off the road in autopilot mode, but the axle broke and it couldn't go any further. And so then the question is, okay, well, how safe are these cars, right? And our goal here is not to beat up on Tesla. Tesla is the only autonomous vehicle out there. And, and whether it should be there or not, that's not the question I'm trying to ask today. It's just, the question is, as we put these autonomous vehicles out there, how do we know how safe they are and that they don't cause more problems than they are solving? And so essentially from the game engine, we can actually see this is a LiDAR scan or a depth scan, and we can extract that. And we can see that's the truck we're going to, and that's the distance that the truck is at, and so on, right? In fact, we can get this kind of depth view from any angle within this virtual world over here. And this is exactly how the vehicle is also driving and deciding what to do. So we use these virtual worlds as an initial way of trying to model and understand these vehicles. It's not the only way to do it, but it's just an initial approach. And so we can capture different views, like I showed you before, the depth view, optical flow view, and so on. And these are called like point cloud views of really understanding, getting distance estimates. We can even put multiple cameras on the car and then use, object detection for multiple cameras as we drive around. So this basically gives us a virtual world and a virtual vehicle, and we can run all these algorithms that are now, in real vehicles. We can run them for real. That means instead of plugging a real vehicle, we can plug in a virtual world and a virtual vehicle. And back in 2015, 2016, this was quite novel. Now this has become a standard way, and there are much better simulators than using game engines. And about 2016, we left the game engine world and we went to better simulators. I mean, but our business was not making simulators. Our business was really about how do we test these vehicles and find these unsafe situations, right? And that testing is really important, but testing is very different over here, because you've got to drive, like, if you want to know how safe a vehicle is, then ideally you'll have to drive like 100 billion miles to know statistically how safe a vehicle is. But here, what we want to do is we want to build a search engine. And that's what our partners at that time were Toyota. They said, hey, can you build us a search engine that searches through all these driving scenarios and guides the vehicle and guides the search to the most unsafe scenarios? Tell us where this system is going to break down and how badly it's going to break down. Or more technically, we want to figure out a way to synthesize these low robustness scenarios, or scenarios where the vehicle is not as confident or is about to make a bad decision. And so what we did was we started to model the road, the vehicles in a language. And so we could describe different driving scenarios, like an exit scenario. And then we have the vehicle dynamics, we have the road details, and we have the perception, planning, control, the full autonomous vehicle stack, all as part of our model. And then we can feed that model now into this testing engine, which first, runs through simulations and searches through different driving scenarios and figures out, well, under these lighting conditions, under these driving, under these other vehicle driving behaviors, this vehicle is unsafe. And for the cases that we want to exhaustively, be able to analyze it, then we can use something called formal methods or formal verification. It goes and analyzes, all possible scenarios, but we use a mix of, ways of testing and verification to be able to get a much more, higher confidence in the vehicle's models over here. And so this allows us to run many different tests. Say a vehicle is coming at a T-junction and then it's making a right turn. Then we can run that test, thousands of times. And we can even put machine learning models over here. Like this was an early version of an end-to-end driving model that's just taking an image and then it's deciding what's the steering angle and the throttle to inputs to have at every move, like that, right? And then so we could run this now for tens of thousands of miles, and it would automatically start to search. But we don't want to just randomly search. What we want to do is have a very smart way of finding these rare events. And so our search engine would just return these. So this is the drive where our search engine is actually driving the car. And here the vehicle loses traction, and then the vehicle basically fails to be safe. And so then our search engine will pick this scenario and it will return that to us. And it starts to pick all of these drivers. So here in this case, we just end up with a blue screen, nobody dies, and we can test this vehicle as much as we want. And but this is very similar to real accidents, right? Like this is a Tesla from 2018 on a highway like that. And you can see that the Tesla oversteered over there and it basically crashed in that case, right? And so It's not to say that it's the same scenario, but these are, very relevant problems even today. So then we said, okay, so this is now going into about 2017. I'm just giving you like a journey of how we have to keep evolving our testing strategies to become, more useful testing strategies. We looked at this approach, this study done back in 2013 of 6 million vehicle accidents and near accidents in the US. And they found that in just 37 driving scenarios, they could account for more than 99% of the accidents. And so we said, okay, why don't we start to model these driving scenarios like a merge, for example, on a highway, and then we can model like curved roads, overtaking, exits, unprotected T-junctions, roundabouts. And then we started to automatically then model all of these scenarios and then run our search engine on this. Let me give you an example of what a search engine would do. It would pick a scenario like this, where the vehicle is exiting and then it spins out of control. Now, this is not manually done by us. This is run automatically by the search engine, and then the search engine returns this and says, there's a low robustness instance over here. The vehicle failed to accomplish its goal of making a safe exit. We can go and analyze that now, and we can say, well, why did this vehicle do that? And when we analyze the decision making in the vehicle, we can see that it switched from the highway speed controller to the exit speed controller a little too late. So it was going in too hot onto the exit, but it also had all these driving policies not to crash into the other vehicle, not to go on the shoulder. So it had to jam its brakes, and it has vehicle dynamics. So the vehicle skidded and came to a halt over there. So it did satisfy some of its missions, but it did not complete the mission successfully. And that allows us to go in and analyze this code. And so then our partners in Toyota, they were like, this is great. Now we can actually visualize this. So our engineers, as they're designing the system, can debug, very complex system, because the problems could be with the environment, with other vehicles, with the vehicle dynamics, with the friction, and so on like that, right? So, or the decision making, and so on. So then our search engine would return a robustness index, and anything that is very negative like that, that is highlighted in red, that we can click on, and it will automatically procedurally generate a counterexample visualization of that. So then it's very easy for the engineer to say, aha, that's the problem over here. We need to fix that. And then once you've tested the vehicle in this virtual world, you can start to test the vehicle then in the next level up in a very detailed, high fidelity simulator that is based on the real world maps. And so this vehicle is basically building a local planner that's looking ahead about 100 milliseconds or 100 meters ahead. And then we rented out with our partners in Japan, rented out a road on the highway to test out the vehicles as we were building them. So we're going from simulation based testing, formal verification over there, to high fidelity testing in the virtual world, to then on-road testing. And that was kind of the work we were doing back in 2017. And then we decided to build at that point, say, can you bring any vehicle, we'll plug it into our virtual world, and it'll just show it this images and give it the LiDAR data. And we'll see how well, any vehicle can do that. And then by running these tests in a synthetic world. So we built this sort of robust testing interface where we can choose different driving scenarios and run through millions of iterations for different lighting conditions, environment conditions, other agent driving behavior, and see when these safety specifications are violated and identify low robustness scenarios over there. But this is not real, right? We need to get more real. And so then we said, why don't we actually use real traffic data as we are driving through this? And so we we used camera data from the highway, and this is a pretty popular data set for Interstate 80. And so, but the question here is, when and where will an AV crash on this kind of highway with this kind of traffic and this kind of rush hour behavior and this kind of aggressive drivers that are there? So by observing the traffic, we can basically extract the distribution of driving behavior from the drivers. And this is quite popular work by many people of really using imaging to capture driving behavior. But then what we did was we used an approach called Generative Adversarial Imitation Learning, or GALE, which says, let me look at the world for 3 hours, and then I will extract all the statistics of the behavior of that world, and then I will generate something that is similar, or I will be able to imitate that world, with the same kind of statistical distributions of how cars are racing ahead, how they are braking, and so on, right? So accelerating cars are pink, braking cars are orange over here for the same highway. And now we can simulate that. We can look at the real world, and we can generate now a simulator that is very similar to that real world. And then, but what we can do in the simulator is something that we can't do in the real world, is we can't force the vehicles to be more on the aggressive side of the distribution and sample more on the aggressive side of the distribution. So then we can capture these rare events now faster, because now we are not focusing on the average behavior. We're just saying, let everybody be more on the aggressive side, and we can see there are side accidents and rear end accidents, and then we can capture these rare events at a much faster rate, between 2 to 20 times faster than just Monte Carlo or random sampling of that, right? So we started to use a lot of models, whether in simulation or with this naturalistic driving behavior. And we know, that simulation is not the answer to the final question, but we have to build up kind of our confidence and be able to test these algorithms as we build them up. And so that's where this quote is very useful, is saying that all models are wrong or all models are false, but some are useful. And we need to figure out which models are useful for the problem. Because then we can go to real vehicles, and as we put these algorithms in real vehicles, we can test them out and we have a nice testing area in the University of Pennsylvania. This is a 23-acre campus extension in Philadelphia, where we can drive cars, fly drones, and do a lot of experimentation over there. And as part of our effort, we also, I'll spend 5 minutes or so on a course of how do we train and teach people how to get involved in autonomous vehicles, how to learn the basics, how do we train existing populations of mechanical engineers, computer science engineers to learn this. And so we started this kind of autonomous racing community courses and competitions, and we built these cars, and these are freely available. I mean, the designs are all available on the f110s.org website, and they have LiDARs, they have depth cameras, they have GPU graphics computing like you would have in a real autonomous vehicle. But this is at 1/10 the scale, because so what we joke over here is that we are 1/10 the size, but 10 times the fun, because you can actually build and learn to drive this for real.
Make the ground shake.
So this is this platform has been around for 3 years, and there are more than 80 universities that have built and are racing these cars and are using them for research development. In fact, the Department of Transportation is entering into an agreement to both. They have 12 full-size AVs, they have 8 autonomous vehicle cars and 4 autonomous trucks, and now they want a full fleet of these 1/10 scale vehicles, so that they can actually do a lot of rapid prototyping for design, testing, and workforce training with these platforms. And the reason we focused on racing is that because it's very explicit, what is the safety and making progress or the performance metrics over here. That, if I'm driving from Philly to New York, then if I'm 5 minutes late, it's okay, but my family is saying, look, at least you're alive. They don't tell me that every time, but in racing, if you're even half a second too late, well, then Red Bull is going to win, right? And that's the difference over there. So it's a career choice over there. So making progress of how aggressively you drive, but while being safe, that choice is constantly being processed in racing. Also, when you drive on the road, you don't know how the drivers are. They are either cooperative and nice drivers, or they are aggressive and assertive drivers. In racing, we are at the end of the spectrum where all the drivers, including your teammate, are all adversarial drivers, right? They all want to win. They have the same objective. So therefore, that puts us in a place where we have to drive at the limits of performance. And that's when the good engineers, the good designers really come out, right? And so we train people to build, code, and race, to go from all these parts in less than 1 hour into a fully made thing, right? And we have a very good manual on our f110.org website, which will help anyone to get started. It's not difficult. And, you know, we would love to have people in Chile, in the whole IADB community, actually use this as a training platform. And we would be very happy to help anyone who's interested in doing this. And this is how the students, they learn to code. And this is not just students, this is even senior developers, people who are, this is a lifelong training kind of thing, right? And there are many universities just in the US, many different institutions internationally, NVIDIA, National Instruments, you know, Intel, they're all backing this, you know, so it's very well backed up. It's very well funded from our R&D perspective for the next 3 years at least. And the main reason was that to build an AV, you need a lot of skills. You need to know sensing, perception, planning. You need to think in terms of a system, not just like, I want to only learn this specialization. And when I grow up, I just want to do that specialization in computer vision or in transportation in general, like that. Right here, to solve a problem, you have to figure out which knobs to turn, how much. You have to be a platform, you know, expert or a platform architect. And that's our goal. It's a system level thinking. And we have a good team of, you know, faculty and students. They are in Europe, and we would love to expand this to South America and Central America. In fact, our European partners, they have a Maserati for their autonomous vehicle, but they are very proud of their F110 over there, right? You can see that over here. And a lot of our students have gone on to join Tesla, NVIDIA, Honda. In fact, this one student, he even became a YouTube star. This is from this is, I think, a screenshot from some time ago. He has, I think, more than 6 million subscribers, but I can't claim any credit for his you know, popularity there. But a lot of the other students, they went to Rivian, which is an electric car company, to NVIDIA, to different robotics companies, and so on. And it's very easy to get involved in this community over here. We have many competitions in the past, you know, across the world, in Seoul, Portugal, Italy. We just recently had a competition in Berlin, in COVID times in Berlin. So it was an online virtual racing competition this year. And we will have the next competition in October as a virtual racing competition as part of IROS, which is a robotics conference. So I'll just end in about 2-3 minutes, but essentially we have an entire course, and the course does not have any exams, but it has, you know, 3 races as part of the competition in the course. And students learn how to drive, how to make safe cars so that they don't crash in the first week. And then in the second week, they learn how to follow the wall to drive the car. And then as we go through the next, then you have a simulator for them to be able to design their systems, and they learn how to do obstacle avoidance in the 3rd week, like this. And the car can decide on its own. There's no remote control involved.
Yeah, keep going. Thank you.
One of the students will jump in front of it, and then So then we teach them the basics of, you know, how does mapping work? How does localization work? All the basics of, you know, how, you know, an autonomous vehicle actually works, but you get to do it for real at this 1/10 scale, which is very different from just doing it with a data science or just images kind of perspective, or just data only perspective. And you learn the differences between simulation and reality. And then that's a very useful thing, right? And then you start to learn how to make the vehicle do what you want it to do, to drive from A to B to C, and how to follow that path. And now the vehicle can be much faster. You can see how fast it goes.
So what I see right here is 5 meters per second with a really fast turn velocity. You can't even keep up with this. It's really insane. Look at that research. Holy shit. Whoa. All right.
So with the map-based methods, the students learn to make the vehicles go faster. They also get a lot of exercise at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's part of the course, to stay fit. And then they have to learn how to do overtaking. They have to come up with new control strategies of how to do overtaking. And so this course can be adapted to, to people who are just at an introductory level, to people who are at an intermediate or advanced level of how to do this racing. And all the material is available. So there are different learning methods of object detection. There's a method on how to teach the vehicle to just drive on its own by showing it fast drives. And here this is called imitation learning, where you can drive for 5 minutes and then you say, okay, now you learn how I drove and you drive just like how I drove. So if I'm a bad driver, you're a bad driver. If I'm a good driver, you're a pretty decent driver then. And so, but these are all the machine learning and AI parts that can come into, right? And then we have many interesting projects that people have done in the past with, say like the one in the bottom left is with a photorealistic simulator, and you can train the vehicle to drive in this virtual world, and then it can drive very well in the real world. And then there are, finally, all of these, come together as part of this. And this is our way of reaching out over there. And you can find all of this on the f110.org webpage. And so I'll stop here. So basically, as we went through this talk, the one question we are trying to answer is, how do we build these safe autonomous systems? How do we understand them in terms of testing, in terms of simulation, in terms of identifying, where the vehicle is very confident and where the vehicle is not confident? How do we stress test the system before we put it on the road? And then the second part was really about, how do we actually train our workforce to be able to build future autonomous systems? And my focus is on, on autonomous systems in factories, in warehouses, in hospitals, not just on the road, right? And so I'll stop at this point, and after the next speaker, we can have some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Learn about the simulations and the experiences with autonomous vehicles that you've been working on. So for the program, let me introduce you to our respondent, Marisela Ponce de Leon. So I'll share my screen again.
Hello, Richard. Hello, Raul, and everyone.
She's a road safety consultant. Hello, Marisela. Well, she has a bachelor degree in international relations from the Monterrey Institute of Technology and Higher Education in Mexico, and a master's degree in public health from the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. Previously, she served as a consultant on road safety and prevention of injuries and violence for the World Health Organization in the Philippines and for the Pan American Health Organization in its country office in Mexico. So Marisela, welcome to the session.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thanks, Raul, for the very interesting presentation on, and I love the way you presented, right, on how really it's important to build safe systems before putting them on the roads, right? And before putting them, as you say, on the real world, which as you mentioned it, very widely varies a lot from many models that you can create. So I love the fact that you presented with that sense, and that you focus your presentation and your research on those points. And also, as you said, not only on the vehicles, but also on medical instruments, etc. So now I'm just going to make some comments regarding both your presentation and a couple of perspectives. And part of it, at the beginning, I'm going to make just a couple of reflective questions, for calling it somehow. And the first one is, how is all of this investment, because we know that this costs a lot of money, right? For the developers, for the researchers, such as yourself, versus the benefits for the general population. That's a question that I frequently ask myself when I'm talking about, or when I'm thinking about autonomy, but also autonomous vehicles in particular. How much is, how is the weight between these huge investments towards the general population, particularly when we think that these autonomous vehicles are still pretty expensive and are still part of the question is this technology enlarging, for example, the gap between rich and poor? Or is this just the beginning and it will tend to evolve towards a much more, shared technology? And how is this technology actually assisting those, the most vulnerable population, where most of the development challenges still sit? We know still in these developing countries, most of the people that die are actually pedestrians or cyclists or motorcyclists. So how is this, do you see, for example, this technology also evolving towards make it safer also for them, their mobility, and how, if so? Also, you've mentioned vaguely, but you've mentioned some of the part of and you've talked before as well on the insurance problem, right? And part of this, part of the questions I make to myself is also, right now, still, we have a huge challenge of having a well-designed and or of both enforced compulsory vehicle insurance in developing countries. So how may these challenges, for example, evolve in this new environment, exciting environment, where we see it share with autonomous vehicles and autonomous technologies? How are we really seeing that part of the insurance working when we still don't have it developed somehow? And let's say right now it's a bit, let's say, easier in the sense that most of this insurance still work with the blame, right, of the driver, and it's still not easy to work on the systems and to implement them nowadays. Also, as you've mentioned, a deployed system always deviates, right, from its model, and the environment always deviate from what we expect, right? So how would this actually play when on top of this, we add the factor and the fact that this kind of technologies will still be coexistent with human beings, which are and we will be unpredictable, and we will always commit errors, right, as part of our nature as human beings. So I believe this would be considered within what you call the robustness of metric, the robustness metric, if I'm not mistaken, towards increasing safety, right? Or towards the contrary, right? Increasing unsafety. So as you say, and as you mentioned, we cannot think of safe or unsafe, but rather on a spectrum, right? But which is the right acceptable spectrum before putting these vehicles widely on the roads? Considering reality varies so much between city to city, as you mentioned some examples from Seattle and from others, and the way people drive or the way people behave in certain environments, and not to say from country to country and from situation to situation, let's say outside of a hospital or outside of a school or outside a prison, for example. So just following on highlighting a couple of main points I want to make regarding, for example, accessibility, right? So again, part of my perspective on this automatization is on how can we really make it accessible in such a way that this kind of technologies benefits, some of them well described by you, can reach the most of the most exposed people, right? Or simply like that, or are they really intended just to benefit only the minority, for example, and the most privileged ones, which could be, but we don't know, right? So how could we make sure that these benefits reach the most vulnerable ones and most of the people that are suffering the consequences of road traffic injuries, in this case, talking about autonomous vehicles, for example. Regarding the second point, for example, inclusion. The fact that there are some automated technologies already available, for example, in vehicles, again, we could mention the autonomous emergency braking, right? Which is already part of the compulsory safety mechanism in some developed countries and developed areas like the European Union. But why they are not yet widely available, widely required, if they're made for the common good? Rather, they're still part of an extra, right? An extra feature, or just made for the luxury vehicles. I'm talking right now in developing countries, right? So again, I go back to one of the first questions I was making right here, and the reflection I was making when hearing your presentation and thinking about these technologies, right? The cost of development and the cost of deployment versus the public benefit. Is it worth it? Is it part of our explanatory nature and part of the system evolution? Now going to a third point, when we talk about development and when we talk about public policy. In this point, I would like just to highlight the importance of supporting countries, particularly the developing ones, in adopting the regulations to privilege the already well-proven and available technologies, as I was mentioning, just as an example, the autonomous emergency braking, to also make them compulsory, and thus supporting safety on the roads, rather than just preparing, right, for the fully autonomous vehicle, for example, which some countries are very aware and worried about it, or asking for support on their legislation for this fully autonomous vehicles, but not really worrying about the technologies that are already available and well proven for safety, right? For which, again, we're lacking of the needing infrastructure, right? When we're talking about a fully autonomous vehicle, at least for them to function adequately and safely. For example, we do not count in developing countries, and in Latin America and the Caribbean region is not the exception. We still do not count with well-marked and homologated sign roads everywhere. We still tend to have a mix of systems between the UN system of signage, right, which is known in the region as the European one, and mixed with the US standards and system, plus the added local mix of signage. So how are we going to actually, be prepared for that when the infrastructure and the signage is still not homologated and ready? Now, going to the best part of it for me, when we talk about safety, right? Most of the marketing, let's say, or most of the information regarding or the benefits of autonomous vehicles is actually on eliminating human error, right? But when we talk and when we compare the traditional road safety approach versus the safe system approach, when we compare them, we see it varies a lot. And it varies between looking at the accident risk and considering this kind of a fortuitous incident, rather than talking right now about fatalities and serious injuries on preventable crashes. We also see the difference in a traditional approach that we actually focus on human factors rather than therefore on human errors, rather than in the safe system approach, talking about accepting that humans make mistakes, and we will always do, and accepting that we are all fragile, and therefore the system should be ready and should be ready for those errors and that vulnerability. And that's why also the difference and the comparison between these two systems goes between going from an individual road user responsibility, right? In this case, for example, the driver, towards going to the system designers. So to the urban developer, to the engineer, from the roads, etc. And well, that's part of the basic comparison that we can make, and we can see that sometimes these autonomous vehicles, we're not really sure if it's talking or if it's really trying to convey a message from the traditional approach, rather than the safe system approach, where I think it should be, or it should go towards the safe system approach that goes from, another comparison goes from the traditional approach that goes from optimizing the numbers of fatalities and serious injuries towards the safe system approach, which goes to eliminate these fatalities and serious injuries. So as you see in this comparison, this kind of technologies kind of mixes those two approaches. So in any case, I think autonomous vehicles promise, right? It's a great promise and focuses on getting rid of these so-called human errors, while promising at the same time comfort and the possibility for driver and passengers to do other activities while being driven, basically. Nevertheless, for what I've known by discussing with people, developers from this kind of technologies, nevertheless, if a problem arises, it is expected actually that the driver kind of reacts and take control. But how will he or she do so if he or she was completely distracted in the first place and putting their confidence in this autonomous technology, right? On the other hand, most of the people being killed, as I was saying at the beginning, are actually pedestrians and or motorcyclists. So how, again, this technology could be adapted towards them and their safety. On the other side, it is relevant to mention that the recommendations of the group of experts presented at the third ministerial conference in Sweden recommends in its second recommendation, which focuses on procurement, referring to utilizing the buying power of public and private organizations across the value chains. It clearly mentions, and I'm going to read it out loud, safe system principles would favor vehicle safety requirements that accommodate driver errors, such as electronic stability control and automatic or autonomous emergency braking, and devices that could reduce crash forces, such as intelligence, speed, adaptation. So again, this is actually a recommendation going from the United Nations and the group of experts. And in this publication, actually, it's also recommended the use of technology, bringing the benefits of safer vehicles and infrastructure to low and middle income countries. And here is where I don't really see the fit yet. However, of course, another of the main recommendations is the modal shift, moving from personal motor vehicles towards safer and more active forms of mobility. So here is another kind of dilemma, I would say, where I've been saying that this kind of technology is still, the autonomous vehicle is still kind of focusing on this private individual vehicles rather than, well, you do mention fleets, but big fleets and trucks, but rather than on systems that could benefit a much more wider group of passengers. On the other side as well, we have seen some delays in adopting safe system approach seriously. And part of it indeed comes from safer vehicles, as I was mentioning. But we need to see vehicles to deliver these zero deaths. But at the same time, and this is part of the responsibility from countries and from decision makers, countries have been identifying the need to set special and very ambitious targets towards reaching Vision Zero, therefore zero deaths. However, they have not really set milestones, let's say milestones per 10 or 20 years. For example, let's say by 2025, all vehicles should reach X safety or X measure of safety. And I believe this is very important because we do need to assess what's needed in order to comply and to reach that milestone, and therefore to reach the target of Vision Zero. And in this case, in particular, we would need, as I was saying, to assess the road infrastructure and to know which are the needs that need to manage before these vehicles, as you said several times, and I completely agree, before they actually come into the real world and we're able to manage this interaction in the real world with other vehicles that are not autonomous and with the nature of us as human beings. So finally, I would just like to finish with a couple of other questions for you, Rahul. based on this reflection and based on this thinking and this share ideas that I was just trying to explain and convey to all of you. So now, in order to, as I was saying, to enrich this conversation, a couple of questions I may have for you is, you have well presented some of the risks still latent in this kind of technologies, but do you personally, and based on your experience scientifically with all the research you've done on this regards, could this risk actually weight more than the estimated benefits? Do you think they do weight? Also, when you talk about this license or the driving permits, it is also important to notice that most of our countries, they still do not have a national registry, neither for drivers, neither for the fleet. Without this national registry, having control and implementing regulations or enforcing them, it's pretty difficult, as you may imagine. So a lot of innovation and investment is creating a new, safer fleet. However, you know, we're still not there yet, in the sense that we're still quite behind on how to actually manage the current fleet. So what would you recommend on this regard? And similar to the previous questions, none of the Latin American and Caribbean countries have adhered yet to the UN WP29 conventions on vehicle safety that date from 1958. And how could we emphasize on the current problems and the current challenges that we have? And we already know what works. In other words, what can we do now based on the current situation, based on the current evidence and the current technology, instead of just relying, for example, in assumptions, you know, especially when we have the deaths now and we know what to do now, and we have conventions dated from 1958, which hasn't been, they haven't been signed yet. So how can we, you know, balance this dilemmas and this speeches, right, in one same line, which is safety. Also, and finally, how about the problem that may cause the automated vehicles in the working zones or construction zones, as they might not read effectively the challenges or the changes around this zone? Similarly, I guess similar to the video that you presented at the beginning, which I believe was from China. So back to you. Thanks.
Well, first, thank you very much, Marisela, for your comments. We have a lot of questions coming from you, and I'm sure Rahul is going to be able to give his answer for some of them, right, Rahul?
Yeah, definitely. I think, thank you for these questions. I think this is exactly the kind of questions that we have to be answering from the beginning, at the mid stage, at every stage, because this is really, you know, a very hard problem. So I'll start with, you know, one of the comments you made is about the marketing, right? And I think what we are really here to discuss is, you know, AVs have been running now, and there's a lot of hype about AVs for, you know, almost like 5-6 years in the mainstream media. And so what's the hype, what's the bullshit, and what's really, you know, actually working, right? And that's what we really are trying to figure out is, you know, and I think it's also what you pointed out, this obsession with vehicles, a single passenger, you know, mostly in Western countries, a single or 2 passenger vehicles, and transit is kind of, you know, almost taking a back seat like that, right? And why can't it be transit first in that sense? There is already a lot of automation in transit, and I think that is this mismatch between the developed and the developing, you know, economics of it, the nation economics. And so, you know, when a car company says we have this autonomous behavior, you should buy this car for, you know, $65,000 or $95,000. That also doesn't make sense in most of the, you know, Central and South American countries, and because who will buy that? Only the super rich. And so then the question comes to, you know, just to reframe your question is, who is this whole AV thing that we are doing benefiting at the end of the day? If I'm spending a time of my life to develop something, I don't just want to develop it for the super rich and for the elite. We want to see that this system actually is having a broad impact for the population that has accessibility problems. So first, in terms of the hype and what can we do from a technical perspective, I can try to put these down into 3 specific questions in the chat. How hard is this problem, and what is the spectrum of how wide can this problem get, and even if we do all of this technical work that we are doing, and how do we know we are done with testing, right? So the basic problem is that risks are always going to be there, and whether it is human versus machine safety. And I think this whole argument is totally messed up, that it's saying all the AV kind of propaganda says that machines are more responsible, more alert, and safer than humans. In general, yes, but not when they are mixed with hundreds or thousands of drivers. And it might be fine in certain well-behaved roads, but I come from India. You try to take a Tesla AV and make it drive there, no chance, right? Very, very difficult, because there are social ways of driving and the cultural aspects of that, and you just cannot encode that in whatever mathematical models we have. That car will be so conservative, it wouldn't even move at a stoplight, and it would just be stuck there, and it would actually create a risk in addition. But the biggest question really that these kind of systems are, so putting an AV in a mix of traffic, of human and machine traffic, is the hardest kind of problem that this kind of technology has ever had so far. They have put this automation in very closed systems, and it has worked well, like within a factory, right? So where are these problems that are still not solved today with the AV specifically is that if you just think about it, an AV in terms of 3 aspects: perception, planning, control. And so in perception is the eyes and ears of the AV, right? We can't model these sensors and the response of these sensors, with to the level of mathematical accuracy, and with the amount of noise and distortion in the signals that we're going to see that well. So modeling the sensors and the response of sensors is very difficult, is not in current reach today. Similarly, modeling other vehicles and other pedestrians and other agents that are not in the autonomous vehicles control, that is also in a very early stage. They can just model the range of behavior, but not anything more. So if you want to sort of say, so what really is the hard part of all of this that we are talking about, is that risk has a distribution. Okay, we are normally, actually humans are not terrible drivers in general. We are kind of scary drivers for most of the time, but not that many. They don't. You would expect that the way people are driving drunk or sleepy, we would have many more accidents than we see. But so they are kind of unreliable drivers, but not incredibly unsafe. So it's a small distinction, but it's a big deal actually when you see in terms of the statistics. So when we are modeling now the other agents, if we are modeling them along a distribution, the tails of the distribution, which are very long, are where we have these rare events. And these rare events are when these accidents are happening. And that's why we have to have such a large kind of sampling of millions or billions of vehicle miles to be able to have a good statistically sound understanding of what is risk and what is the safety. And we can't grapple that problem very well, because we can't be so this is a chicken and egg problem. In order for me to test the autonomous vehicle, I have to put it on the road. And in order for me, if I put it on the road, I will kill few pedestrians and few other vehicles. And this becomes an ethical issue then. And then, for the policy powers to be in the US, they say, no, test, we'll do pre-market approval later. Let's be forward first. China is our enemy now, and we got to do that. And that's basically the background political dialogue that is happening. But the European way is called, follows a precautionary principle and says, if there is some assumed or some evidence of risk, you need to be able to, as a company, you need to address that risk and mitigate that risk prior to putting your product in the market. And that is a more mature way of doing it, but that is also a big impediment, and it will delay technology coming in. So how do we balance precautionary principle versus market first? If you look at like planning, how do we manage traffic rules? If a car has been trained to drive in San Francisco and we bring the car to Chile and we say, okay, now you drive over there, it will be very confused. And that's why a lot of these accidents are happening in China, because the cars were, they say, designed in California, like Apple likes to say. Designed in California is a bad idea when you're driving the car somewhere else. It has to be designed and driven and tested in that place, right? And in control, that's sort of where a lot of the issues we look at is how does it make good decisions? How does it make consistent decisions? But you have to see under different lighting conditions, under rural roads, under different traffic behavior, under different weather conditions. There's just too many scenarios to try. So, but let's see what can we accomplish today with this technology, right? I mean, the AV part, market-wise, maybe for commercial, AVs, might be a mismatch for a lot of developing countries, because that's not the need. That's not the most pressing need, I mean, from my perspective. But what can IIDB partners focus on? This technology is actually very ready for, autonomy across logistics supply chains. All of this technology, hardware, software, the prices have dropped down like 5 to 10x in the last 5 years for LiDARs, for cameras, for compute systems, extremely cheap right now compared to that. Distribution centers, forklifts, trucking, last mile, all these are extremely boring, very boring. And, for young people, it's very unsexy applications. They don't even think about, distribution centers, right? They just want their Amazon package here in the US. So service bots have become like, there's a big boom now. It's just starting up because of COVID times also, of these within the hospital to deliver blood, to deliver, supplies, to deliver like radiation medication, because nobody wants to actually touch that. In closed centers like retirement home communities, because it's not about humans not wanting to be there. That's where this technology can succeed and actually have an economic value. It can have a product market fit, right? And like there are also things of why focus on the car being smart? Why don't you have certain infrastructure like parking garages, for example? They can be smart and guide cars to come in, but any car. So how can we have a different way of saying, okay, we'll have smart infrastructure like parking garages that have sensors in, that can detect vehicles and drive them into the slot. All you have to do is just bring the car to the front. How can we have any car do that? And any car, I mean like these drive-by-wire cars. And the third is like, what's a pathway of this technology availability, right? And I think that's a back and forth discussion of, how can a lot of this stuff is available, as open source, as, for public use, and even within the DOT, it's all shared, but this needs to be made available, and there needs to be a kind of a pathway, a pipeline between IIDB, partners and a lot of this. So I think for, question number 2, where IIDB partners can focus on, all of that is quite in a pretty ready to, technology readiness level, that it can be done as a proof of concept in year 1, a prototype and mini deployment in year 2, and then in the year 3 and 4, it can go into, a much more scale up kind of level, right? So I think that kind of discussion is something that we should have further, because a lot of the resources, the code, the hardware designs, including like, policies and the thinking of that is what the exchange should be focused on. And I think just because in the US, the venture capital community is overly, focused and biased on certain segments and ignoring other segments, we can actually explore other segments, within the Central South American context.
Thank you, Rahul, for your answer. Now, well, we're running out of time, but I think we have some time for one last question from the public. So we have a question from Christian Navas, and he says, from the perspective of traffic safety, how far away are we to have robustly safe autonomous vehicles? Is it, do we have to close a gap in algorithms, in hardware, or where is the highest gap to reach that robustness?
Yeah, so I think there is still a long duration before you can actually widely deploy these autonomous vehicles. By long duration, I mean there is a 10-year gap, from now till when these vehicles can actually be confidently deployed to say, well, we can realize, we can have this kind of crash rate for different driving scenarios. And while companies might say we drove 400 million miles and we have so few accidents, I think those are just data points along that pathway, right? And I think someone was joking that only if Tesla drives in this Bolivian highway once, then I will buy the Tesla. But you need to show me that you can drive along the Bolivian highway. I think there's one cliff road, right, along Bolivia, and they said, you drive along that, I'll buy your car. Right. So I think it has to go through that. Right. So, and that's going back to question one. It's a long road, but doesn't mean we have to be only obsessed with those AVs for the highway driving. There is an extremely large logistics world out there that can already benefit. And for me, that's my practical focus of the next 5 years.
Oh, thank you. I guess we still have time for one last question. So the second question goes as follows. So which are the main difficulties of associating your simulations to the reality? Which variables are more difficult to model?
Could you repeat that?
Sorry. So it's, which are the main difficulties of associating your simulations to the reality, and where are the most difficult variables to model?
Yeah. So this is in our community, we call, like the engineering community, we call this the sim to real gap. And the sim to real gap is still very wide. And so like I mentioned, like, perception, like, being able to model sensors and being able to model other agents that are not in our control, I would consider them to be the two biggest things that we do not capture very well. And but just to give you an idea, why do we do this? Suppose you have $100 to spend on making sure your vehicle is safe. Then we can help you with saying, you need to spend $15 on simulation, and it will give you confidence in these areas, but low confidence in these other areas. Then you need to spend, another $10 on 1/10 scale, evaluation, and that'll give you confidence in these other areas that simulation wasn't able to get to, where the vehicle dynamics are, the problem. And then the remaining $75 or so, that's where we can guide you exactly where you do not need to spend the money in testing and where you should emphasize your testing. Because we are trying to zone in and say, simulation can do some things well and it can't do some things very well. But at least those some things well, you don't have to test as much in real life. And what you need to focus on your real life testing is, is actually, because it's very expensive to do real life testing.
Thank you very much, Rahul, for your answer. And with this last question, we close this 11th session of the seminar series on autonomous mobility and future of transportation. So thanks, Yolanda, thanks, Rahul, and thanks, Marisela, for taking part of this session and for sharing your thoughts with us in this day. Thanks to the public for joining us in this virtual session. We will soon be sharing this recording of the talk in the Vimeo channel of the IDB. And that's it. Respect your distance, stay safe, and take care. Goodbye.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.